Lovely to be down here in the air conditioning. If nothing else, that's a really good reason to do this. So Neil has admitted that it isn't 2021. So we're not doing any kind of time travel this evening, but we are really delighted to be having this event. I think it's going to be a very exciting discussion. We have two amazing speakers who have been here all week, as many of you in the room know, doing some exciting and never before tried experiments with tackling Rome together with a large portable blackboard and then bringing their findings back and creating what you can see outside in the foyer, which is just looking beautiful. Lecture is sort of drawing on the methodology that's perhaps at play out there as well in the foyer and in this week's course. And we're going to learn more about what's behind the practice that you've been experiencing this week. So this week, for those who don't know, we are running our annual architectural practice course, Reading Rome. We have 11 amazing students from practices all over the UK, really generously sponsored by their practices to come and spend a week with us. And Níall McLaughlin and Yeoryia Manolopoulou are here leading the course as the tutors for the week. And tomorrow night, we will see in a kind of slightly more formal way what they have come up with in the 5 days they've been here. Perhaps I don't even need to introduce them, but I will do so anyway. Yeoryia Manolopoulou is an architect and a design researcher. She teaches at Bartlett in London. She's also the founder of AY Architects and the author of Architectures of Chance, published by Routledge in 2013. She does work that explores architecture's relationship with experience, chance, and the environment. She's earned numerous accolades through her career for her built work and her publications, including the RIBA National and London Awards and the Stephen Lawrence Prize. She's exhibited her work internationally, including at the Venice Biennale, the Royal Academy, and Storefront for Art and Architecture. And she's played a central role in Bartlett Design Research Folios series and has served on panels and juries for the AHRC, the RIBA, and several international academic institutions. She has been collaborating with our other speaker for some time, and it's amazing to see their interaction, how they play off each other, and that is a very sort of live and exciting experience. Níall McLaughlin is an Irish-born architect based in London, known for his work in education, culture, and housing. He's professor of architectural practice at Bartlett School of Architecture as well, and winner of the 2022 RIBA Stirling Prize for the new library at Magdalene College, Cambridge, which is my alma mater. And I was cycling to and from work up and down the towpath in Cambridge as that building was going up. So I saw it grow across the other side of the river, and it was a really amazing experience. So I was very, very excited when that won the Stirling Prize. His projects have been widely published and exhibited internationally. Most importantly, he's also a former member of the Faculty of Architecture of the British School at Rome. And in fact, as a member of the Faculty of Architecture, it was Neil who first suggested to us that we might like to run a course like Reading Rome. So it is thanks to him that we are here today. So as I say, they've been here this week generously leading our summer school, which brings together a group of early career architects for a week to deep dive into aspects of Roman architecture and experience. And we're hugely grateful to them for doing that. And we're hugely grateful to them for agreeing to speak about aspects of their practice and methodology tonight. So join me in welcoming them for On Drawing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abby. I have to tell you that you have just leapt over the Beecher's brook of lecture and introductions, because for the first time in 25 years, you've managed to say Níall McLaughlin and Yeoryia Manolopoulou correctly. No one has ever managed that before. So I'm going to briefly just set the scene for this lecture. There was an uncertain audience for the lecture. We didn't know who it would be. So we thought the best thing to do is to speak to our own students and hope that you'll enjoy it if you're not one of our students. And the purpose of it is really to talk about a particular idea of drawing. It's not a general treatise on drawing. It's talking about a number of aspects of drawing that interest Yeoryia and I. We're interested in how architects get outside their own subjective or even egotistical views about authorship or what a design might be, and how they see it as being, they're laying their own creativity open to collective processes. We're interested in what happens in that situation and in ways in which chance plays into that. And we like the idea that we're going back in almost every, with one exception, almost every one of these projects into the physical act of drawing. So the commitment in all of our projects is that there's something that happens to people when they draw together. And of course, there's a lovely double meaning to that word. When you draw together, when you physically engage in the act of drawing together, it also brings you close to each other. As a teaching tool, we believe that if we can teach our students to teach themselves, we can sit back and smoke a cigar. So that's, in a sense, the principle of almost everything that we're doing. And I'm going to take you with Yeoryia through, I think, 6 projects, bookended by substantial ones that we're keen on that we've done together, one in the Bartlett School of Architecture and one for the Venice Biennale. And in between, we'll just look at other individual projects that Yeoryia and I have done separately. So the first one I'm going to talk about is called Drawing Together, aptly enough, and it was done in the Orkney Archipelago. I'm pleased to say it was done in 2018, so I've got this one right. And if you haven't visited, it's one of the most extraordinary places on Earth. It's an absolutely beautiful place. And it was a major center of civilization in the Neolithic, around 3,500 to 2,500 BC. And there's something absolutely fascinating like these settlements like Skara Brae. What we did was to go for a week, and our students will be familiar with the format. Island. That's the old man of background, traveling by boat and car between the and visiting sites. And then every evening coming back to a little hall we had hired behind Kirkwall Cathedral, the great Viking cathedral in Orkney, and then taking over that hall every evening and drawing together from about 7 p.m. until the early hours of the morning. And the drawing process itself was one in which the students were asked to draw together. So just looking at that as a context, I want to speak first of all about the archipelago itself. It's an amazing collection of islands linked by the fact that they're all variations on sandstone. And sandstone is a sedimentary stone that's laid down. And we thought there's a lovely comparison between drawing and the way in which these things are laid down. It's very fine sand that's laid down year after year after year in different conditions that makes this extraordinary layer cake. When you look at the cliffs, it's just millions of years of this fine drifts of sand being laid down one on top of the other and then compressed. But depending on the conditions in which the sand is laid down, it gets completely different textures within the bedding planes, whether it's laid down as alluvial sediment, whether it's laid down in an inland sea, or whether it's laid down in the wind. That creates a kind of secret script inside the stone that tells you how the stone is going to break down when it erodes afterwards. And it gives you completely various features as you move around the islands, like these sea stacks here, which may have been laid down by wind but have been eroded by the sea. And so walking the islands in company, talking to each other, discovering things about each other, making friendships as we move around. The islands themselves have got this extraordinary thing where after they were laid down, they have been interrupted by these huge walls of ice that come and go from the Arctic. And when they do, they completely compress the land and then allow it to lift up again. And it lifts and falls in different speeds. So the relationship between the land and the sea is always changing in terms of the levels. Here on one of the islands, a Neolithic house just appeared out of the sand dunes a few years ago. And who knows, in a few years' time, it might just disappear again. So the whole landscape seems to be being created and disappearing at the same time. And the one oldest thing we found that spoke about human occupation is these beautiful circles of that you find around a charcoal hearth. And it's like this kind of petrified acoustic in the landscape, the sound of people knapping flints together around the fire. In some of these, they see more crude flints and more fine flints in the same circle around the fires, suggesting there's some kind of school going on, that some people are learning and some people are already experts. But it's laid out, in a sense, in this kind of petrified circle around charcoal. And then all over the whole island, you have this run rig cultivation from the Middle Ages, which sort of scratches out the island and makes a drawing, I guess. And the other thing which is very beautiful is it's a wind shadow island. There's hundreds of words for wind in the Orkney dialect. And in a sense, human activity occurs in the lee of the wind. And that sense of how things happening in the shadow of the wind is very strong on the island. And finally, it's a kind of a gateway to the Arctic. So in the whole 19th century, if you wanted to find the Northwest Passage or go to the North Pole or go whaling or whatever else you would want to do, you would always pick up your crew at Stromness. So just to talk about the drawing project itself, as we walked around the island, we collected experiences, we explored the archipelago, we learnt the history and so on. And then every evening we came back and we had this huge sheet of cartridge paper, which we rolled out on the floor every evening. And it was very important that Yeoryia and I told the students they should not decide what they're going to do and then draw it. What they had to do was simply draw. And anytime they asked us a question, what should we draw? How should we draw? What should we draw with? The answer we always gave them was draw, draw. And the idea is you discover what you're going to draw by drawing it. And it's like ensemble playing or jamming in music. You begin to play and then you begin to pick up something from the person who's next to you. And there's a really beautiful thing about that. So every evening we would sit around, here we are looking at the blank sheet, but then after that we would start to draw. And when we start the next evening, we would sit around again, and so it goes. Eating, as the team here know, is a very important part of it, that you come out and relax, sit around and eat, and begin to make connections and talk about what you're doing. And we made the size of the page the exact same size as the space of all the bodies that drew on the page. So our fingertips are touching in the middle on the white space of the page. And then it's big enough to stretch out to where our toes are, all of the students together. And you get this lovely thing where you have to sit on the paper. And so the bit of the paper that you sit on naturally is left white as you draw around yourself. And so you get this patterning that comes from the bodies. We spoke about a number of things. One of them is this game Twister. Do you remember that game you get in the box, the parlor game, where you all have to get into different positions? And so that even the bodily proximity is part of the experience. And also this idea of always completing each other's drawing task. And so we began, first of all, with the tools which we'd brought, but bit by bit, we found tools on the island, like shells and so kinds of ink that we made that began to inform the drawing. And so it developed. And I really enjoyed that sense that the bodies are that the performance of the drawing is so much part of what it is. And the purpose of the drawing is not to complete the drawing, but the purpose of the drawing is to draw. It's the activity of drawing itself. And if you don't mind me dwelling on these images, because I really enjoy that sense of the relationship between the body, the drawing hand, these ideas of proximity. And even as you can see in this drawing here, the pieces of thread that are used to link things together. And by, the students became more ambitious about how they would link their drawing task together. So you can see here that the red piece of thread is, we have, I think, how many limbs have we got? Seven limbs making the same piece of drawing and just experimenting with what would happen out of that. And you can see that the tools, like these thin pieces of sandstone, have been picked up and used for scraping and marking. And there was a lovely sense in which the marking is on the page, but also begins to be on the students themselves. And the proximity between, the human body. You can see the marks on the back of the heel of the walk of the day in that photograph. And it wasn't our choice, but we made the drawing from black ink. But the students discovered a drink, which is the drink of only university students and total alcoholics. It's called Buckfast. And it's a very, very sweet, dark drink that the students, I think it's made by the Benedictines in Scotland, but the students would drink Buckfast as they were drawing. And so I think is this the film? I'm going to just play a little bit of this film. It's a little bit in slow motion, but it gives you a sense of the world in which the students were occupying as they drew. So the black stone has been dipped in ink. The black stone is picked up from the shore and then dipped in ink. The thin sheets of sandstone are being used to scrape the surface which has been drawn on. And then some of the marks which are made are then colored over with fine penmanship. You get that sense of the dance and the interaction between hands. I'm sorry, the flickering here is the fact that there was a fluorescent light in the room. So we're seeing what fluorescent lights are like in slow motion. And then you can see every evening as was left behind, even the tools become part of the space of the drawing as you leave it for the next day to come back to it. And that sense of proximity, I think, was very, very important. We felt over the week that the students were becoming closer and closer to each other. We went to this lovely place called Olav's Wood, and they made the Olav's Wood Orchestra, which I'm now going to play you now. I hope we have sound. It was a beautiful thing that when they started, they were sort of standing in the room like this, kind of, oh yes, pleased to meet you, how do you do? At the end of it, when they're taking rests on the hike, they'd all fall into a big heap together. And I think that thing, that sense of communal interdependency is something they were then taking into the rest of their 2 years in our studio. But potentially, very often as a teacher, we find, Yeoryia and I, that we'll come back 20, 30 years later and find these groups are still very, very bound together in their practice. So here we are making the drawing, the sense of turning around and discussing the drawing at the end of the day, and the relationship between bodies and drawing. And so this is well, I was going to say this is the finished drawing. Of course, the purpose is that it couldn't possibly be the finished drawing. This is a cut from the drawing when we had to leave Orkney and we had to take it back. And so we had to stop drawing. But we see it as being an ongoing process. And I think that's very, very important. And I just want to say something which is another interest of mine, which has got to do with Neolithic building. I'm very interested in how Neolithic building shines a light back onto contemporary architecture. If we look at Skara Brae here with its beautiful dressing table or dresser in the middle of the kitchen, the fire pit in the middle, it's extraordinary that the houses in Orkney in stone are copies of the tombs in Orkney, the barrow tombs, which are themselves stone copies or skeuomorphs of older timber buildings. So the original people who inhabited Orkney were making timber buildings. They then make stone copies of them as tombs, and then they make stone copies of the tombs as houses again. And I think that's a very important aspect of architecture. And when you look at the stones and the houses and the monuments, you look at the back of them, they have this extraordinary scribbles and scratching on the rear side of the stone as though they're incantations or something. We've no idea what they are, but they were marks which were put on the invisible surfaces. And looking at places like Maze How and so on, these extraordinary monumental forms. The one I really want to speak about is the Ring of Brodgar, because it's a fantastic stone circle that stands between two huge bodies of water on the archipelago. And we can see these standing circles these days. And this is a view across the remaining standing stones. Most of them are lying down. And when the archaeologists looked at the stones, the different colors are the different quarries across the archipelago that the stones came from. So clearly communities were dragging stones for years across the archipelago to put them into this arrangement. Not only that, but they were then moving the stones around within that circle. So they were being displaced within the circle. And the Neolithic archaeologists have said the strange thing about these stones is that they don't have firm foundations like the houses. They have very provisional foundations. And they look at the quarries where the stones have been lifted out, and they see the risks of carrying these stones across a landscape. And in a kind of transfer, which is speculative but interesting, they look at anthropological reports from Java and Indonesia and speak to people who have records of what people thought they were doing when they were dragging stones in the early 20th century. And there's a lovely observation that they make, which is that construction in this period, with larger social groups needing to hold themselves together in a continuity of time, was beginning to take the place of blood. In other words, investment in mutual construction projects was beginning to take the place of the bonds that were created by family and blood. And it means that the purpose of construction was not to make the monument. The purpose of the monument was to have a focus for the construction activity, which was an activity to bind human communities together. And that seems to me to be very important to understand what architecture is about. It's not the creation of unique artifacts. It's the creation of performances across time. And when we look at these monumental stone circles, we're not seeing an intended complete monument. What we're seeing is a cut from a long performance, and we're just seeing a still from that performance. And we can imagine these stones as dancers. And of course, the purpose of moving these stones is to hold these communities together so they can achieve things through time. And implicit in that is the idea that our students too, in working and drawing together are binding themselves as a community over time. This is the very start of the drawing, and the little voice you hear is Yeoryia's. These are the students. Yeoryia.
I'm going to talk a little bit about my own work here, and then there will be a section from Níall on his own, on a separate drawing project, and then we'll come back together to talk about more collective work that we are doing together. As Abby mentioned, I have a strong interest in the relationship between design and chance. My PhD was totally focused on this, and then I produced later on a book about it. Architects do not often talk about chance, but we know that artists, especially practitioners in the performing arts, they acknowledge the role of the accident and chance in creativity. So I'm very interested here. Much younger, I was wearing this kind of device, looking at things that are out of my control, looking back. So these mirrors bring forward the space that was on my back. And my interest in chance is not one of pure randomness. I'm very interested in how one can structure an element of chance in their work. So this kind of set or system that I conceived as a set of shutters is very malleable and changeable, but in fact it is based on simply 3 templates that are mirrored and played and reconfigured. So of course the relationship between design and chance can be very interesting if we start thinking about scores. And I think this is something that Níall and I explore very often in our collective work and collaborative work with students. A score would determine a very precise design of the process, but allow the outcome to be open. So this is an example of a score in terms of how this project, I did this project in Montreal with a group of students in an international workshop there. And the structure of the week was very important to me. So the structure of the different ensembles, what each ensemble would do, what condition they would be thinking about. One may be thinking about continuity or pose or membrane or light. What would be the purpose that they would be constructing a line or a social situation, or they would be thinking about the sky or a poetic situation. And then there were also visual prompts that I was giving to the different ensembles. And so the first ensemble, working with foundation, had the drawing on the left. The second ensemble, working and thinking about rooms, they were looking at this other drawing by Kenneth Martin. The third one, who would be looking at screens, was looking at this prompt. And the fourth one, who was looking at the sky, was looking at this section, which is vertically here, but it's the section of Buxbath Church by Utzon. And the students would produce individual responses to these prompts. So each student would produce a kind of, I see them as an alphabet. I see them as a drawing alphabet. So each student would bring into the group their own identity and their own interests based on the prompts that they would be given. And then the whole week would be a process of combining their interests, combining their skills, and creating a kind of a grammar out of these individual design identities. And so every evening we would come back and gather the material that the students had produced. And little by little, the responses became larger topographies. So this is a quite large drawing. We had something that we would call a stage. And here you see it was about 2.5 by 2 meters or something. And we would all gather, and little by little, we would put layers of this process in one singular piece. I was very interested in how we wouldn't have a collage of different ideas or a collage of techniques, but we would arrive into some kind of singularity. So these layers, every evening, every day would finish with one of these layers. And then these layers bit by bit became more three-dimensional. They started becoming rooms or societies of rooms. And in the end, kind of a whole world, the whole architectural world was created. And people could read multiple scales in it. It could be seen as a neighborhood or as a city. You could read it in different scales. And the last project that I want to show as an example of this process happened a few years ago at Grimsdyke Farm, which is an experimental school or site where you can make things. And you can go as a practitioner or you can go there with a group of students. So in this case, I'm here with Unit 17, my students. We had about 5 days or 1 week, similar to what we're doing here. And there were two conditions. There was the room that you see here, and there was a landscape. And the project evolved as a conversation between what would be the activity in the room and what would be the activity in the landscape. We had something like 360 tiles, and the drawing and glazing on the tiles became instructions for what would happen on the landscape. So the tiles gave us the score or the script for an installation that would happen on the landscape. So here you see a notional plan of that installation on the landscape. And here you see detailed elements that they would be constructed and performed. So these were done things were done in the room, and there was a facility for glazing the tiles. And we were working with this amazing ceramicist as Jessie Lee. And these kind of activities were happening on the land. And we were interested here in how the rope could perform the activity of drawing. I'll play this, and that's the end of my talk for this phase, because this is a film that the students put together, but I think it explains the process quite well. How can I put it high up?
As 16 collective minds, bodies and voices, we design and build the project of Grimsdyke Farm, a lived workplace inviting into the countryside. Its basis is made of London. For the special ground community farm, we chose art as one ground community. A digital art journey book, issuing 256 individual art, was composed in the London Library. Project developed environment. We found the first regional nation. This would take our second last 15. One wrote, separation completion, then further 60 months into the track. We attached the rope to a 5 meter thin post trunk guarding the grass. And we built a fitness devices separate 30 kidneys. We did not Arwen is engraved into land, creating a relationship between the infill drawing and the outdoor landscape. The entire drawing became a form of structured remote construction and a record of action for the land. And they were by the project development. We always came back and met together and laid out the individual experiences and perspectives with it. About mounted on the roof tower became a symbol of our collective unity. It signifies self unity and we felt our powerful action. This project is about design principles collaboration, which made 16 people new roles of authorship and activity with project. Five actions represent 16 activities, 6 days, 5 together at the art, the accountability of this construction. Our landscape form is ephemeral and left no trace of them, while ours became a permanent record and takeaway of our time frame. We set off to not know what our materials were or what our performance and norms were going to look like. But we knew, in remaining indeterminate, we would open ourselves up to each other and put trust in the process itself. Is a fire.
That's really beautiful. I have to say the next one is much less pretty, but I think no less interesting in another way. We had this extraordinary shock in March 2020 when the whole office had to go back into our sitting rooms and bedsits and flats all around London and try and work out how to work remotely and try and master the intricacies of Zoom. And we thought that the whole way in which we drew together in the office was completely disrupted. And we had to try and master the new techniques of using the pad on your laptop to make a drawing through the Zoom medium, which seemed like having to learn to walk again. It was extraordinary. And everybody doing it from these tiny capsules around the city. At the time, there were two things. For those of you who are not British, there was the clap for cares that happened, I think at 6 o'clock. It was 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock every evening, once a week, when people stepped out of their front doors and all clapped together and banged pots and so on to clap for the people in the NHS. And that was a regular event that was about bringing the city together. And there was something that we took, which was these stories from Boccaccio's Decameron, which were to do with people who have come away from the Black Death, escaping Florence after the Black Death, who were in a house together and start talking together about the most physical and intimate and sort of basic of human desires and activities. There's 100 tiny short stories about sex and love and food and the kind of physical, visceral aspect of being alive. So from this very remote kind of abstract situation that we found ourselves in our tiny little bedrooms, we wanted to do something. And what we did was to set up a project, which is an open project across London. I think eventually there were about 500 participants, most of whom were not architects. So you have to be patient with the drawing style because most people here are not architects and learning to draw for the first time. But we talked about the idea of drawing, and then we set up a whole suite of white rooms that were managed by individuals in our office. So they would open up the white rooms and you could go and join any of these white rooms online. And the first thing they were asked to do was to draw a street, and then to draw their house on the street, and to draw themselves on Zoom looking out the window of their house on the street. So this is phase one. And then we said, imagine yourself coming downstairs and standing at your front door and clapping or banging a pot or a kettle for the carers. So draw that. So they then drew that. And then we said, imagine one day when lockdown is over, when you could walk out onto the street and start to dance with your neighbors again. Imagine yourselves all dancing on the street. So they drew that. And then we said, imagine when you danced on the street that you all began to plan a space at the end of your street that you could all use together, a garden or a swimming pool or a pub that would be on the end of your street. So now draw that. And so they drew that. You bear in mind, I'm moving between rooms here, so you get a sense of the variety of drawing style as we go through. But they're adding on to the drawing. On the right-hand side, you can see the communal space. And then we said, if all of these communal spaces came together, they could connect. And in a sense, these are different versions of the communal spaces. This is a Lido. They could connect together. And if they connected together, what would they make? So these are some of the samples we got from the white rooms. So we had a small break of about 10 minutes, and somebody in our office patched the whole thing together and made a city out of all the white rooms. And so you had this sense about it. What was nice was the whole event online was timed to start at 20 to 5, so that by the time they got to the point where they'd finished the room, we were able to have this moment where the actual clapping for carers happened at the same time as they were clapping for carers online in the film. I'm going to just show you this very quickly. I won't do the whole film because I just want to give you a sense of what it was like at the end when the room is finished. So this is James, who was the guy who had to put the whole thing together. The audio is currently playing while you are joining the AHRC. And this is perhaps the first time we ever drew on, or at least I ever drew on a floor. It goes back to about 2010. I'm going to just speak briefly about a chapel we designed in Oxfordshire. It was under a great beech tree, and we made a sacred space beneath the tree. This is a sketch I did of it. And there were trees on the site, and we thought we could make an architectural clearing between the trees. And we took a poem by Seamus Heaney about a ship that had appeared in the air of a chapel, and the monks who had witnessed it. And it linked the word nave of a chapel to the word nave of a ship, to the word nave, which is the still point of a turning wheel. And we imagined the disciples in the boat on the Sea of Galilee with Jesus. And we imagined the congregation beneath. And we thought, could we make an architecture which is a dual image of the two? I'm not going to show you the building, but I'm going to show you a project we did at University College Dublin with my team from the office and with some students from University College Dublin. And it was based on the fact that the medieval masons used to pour plaster of Paris onto the floors of the cathedrals they were building. And then they would draw out the jigs for the stonework on the plaster. So we took an old Georgian room and just got a builder to pour lime plaster over the whole floor. And this is what it looked like when we started. You can see the doorways into the room. And the process was really just very simple. It was setting up the geometry of the ellipse and setting up the jig for the building. And a week before it started on site, imaginatively reconstructing the building by hand, moving away from our computers and setting up the ellipse and so on. And it took a week for us to draw it together before we gave a lecture. And the thing I remember more than anything else is the pain you get in your wrist when you're drawing with that crayon on the plaster. The physical resistance of the materials that you're using, so different from the digital world. And what was beautiful about it, I can tell you that 2 people in this room married each other. I think that's important to know. And the way that people worked together. We were walking around the School of Architecture in UCD in these white outfits. John Toomey insisted that this was a piece of theatre that we were conducting, but we said it was just to keep the surface clean. And that sense of the drawing materials being part of the space of the drawing. These are the window mullions of the clear story all around the edge of the building. This is one of the freestanding columns, which is being projected back then with the beams going back into the center of the floor. This is the tabernacle in its little niche by the side of the wall. And the sense that even the waste materials from the process became part of the aesthetic of the drawing. And then being able at the end of it, when there was a lecture, to walk in bare feet over the surface of the drawing and to enjoy the sensual experience of walking on that plaster floor. And this is a kind of compound image of all of us working on the drawing with the completed drawing beneath us. And you can see all the windows and the doors into that space and the sense that the whole room has become the drawing. And then this is an image of close-up of one part of the drawing with the setting up lines. And I thought it would be a nice thing for you to imagine that you're on that floor looking at the plaster, drawing it with wax pencils, and then you're tired and you roll over on your back and you look up, and this is the ceiling of the actual finished building. that you look up into. So it's that sense of the projection of the plan up into the space of the building and the relationship between the two of them, and the light, then it gets filled with light. And these are the people who worked on the project. So we want to talk a little bit, Yeoryia, are you going to do it, about the project we're doing here this week for those of you who are part?
I hope this is going to be interesting for those who have not participated, but hopefully also for our participants. The theme of this workshop is portals and frames. So we're very interested in what Rome can offer to us in terms of an understanding of portals and frames, whether it is conditions of living that portals and frames separate, whether it's ordinary and mundane spaces, whether it's more monumental gates, whether it is sacred spaces, or other spaces that allude to political or military things. So we're very interested in an open sense on what a threshold or a gate or a frame or an opening is. And that's one part of our theme. The other part is an interest in the frescoes and the wall paintings that have preserved, especially around Bosco Trecase and Bosco Reale. And so we looked at this quite carefully. We think they are really fabulous. We were very lucky to meet and spend time with Chris Svitsky, with whom we discussed the different styles, the first, second, third, and fourth style of wall painting in ancient Roman times. And here you see the different sets of frescoes that we gave as a reference to our participants. So this is from the west wall of room L of the villa of Fanius Sinistor at Bosco Reale. And this one, it's very impossible to imagine, but it's a cubiculum, the bedroom of the villa of P. Fanius Sinistor at Bosco Reale. And we're very interested, we had very, very good discussions with the participants at the start of the course to discuss of course, not only the pigments and the tonalities of the frescoes and how expressive they are in that sense, but also the very structure of the drawing, so that the drawing is not simply an impression, but how exactly it is structured, what is the suggestion of depth, how perspective might have been used, how other kind of alignments have been used, and to what extent is a material representation or another kind of representation which starts becoming more lyrical or imagined. And when we met the group, this is our essentially this is the score that we gave them. Each group, the 11 participants were split into 4 groups. Each group studied one of these frescoes, and they were given a precise set of pigments, of soft pastels, that were sampled from this fresco. So each group had a different set of pastels, soft pastels and chalks. And these soft pastels are pure pigment, they're handmade, and also standard chalks. And these sets are carefully combined with these particular wall paintings. And our lovely group, when we started in empty blackboards, they posed for us, and Neil took these photographs. Of course, on the top left, this is not a participant to the workshop in the drawing sense. This is Chris, who has helped us so much. with Chris, we did fantastic walks in the city, and we looked at a very beautifully curated sequence of gates and thresholds. But then we also went to the museum, where we looked at amazing frescoes. I'm sorry, these photographs are not the best, but they give you a sense, as you know, whole room constructions, and then the amount of detail is magnificent. At the same time, on the second day, we spent more time here, and we were so lucky to spend time with the librarians here in the building, and to see again a very careful selection of gates, including these amazing engravings by Piranesi. And our working space is this studio that you've been through. You've got to come to the lecture, and the participants are using a set of smaller boards for their tests and experiments and their collaborative thinking, and then bigger boards that then they create to conclude each day. So here you see, you know, we started from these empty boards, and these are in these fabric bags, we had our tools that we would carry in the city. And on the left, you see one of the smaller blackboards where the group was testing ideas. We're very interested, as Níall was saying, in the collaborative act of drawing, where the drawing is a shared surface, and where drawing is, I think we're looking often for an analogy between experience and drawing, where the process of drawing might be analogous to a process of inhabitation. And this is why we choose to work often in very large surfaces, because you inhabit the drawing, you spend time in the drawing, and the experience of drawing, or the experience of design, and the pleasure that one might find in that might have an equivalent, an analogy to the experience of the built architecture. So we are looking for this analogy between drawing as an act of inhabiting a surface and architectural experience. And we would like us ourselves, we're not here necessarily as we are guiding the group, but we are also learning with the group and doing things for the first time with a group, and making our hands, you know, dirty with the materials, with the chalks and the pastels is very important. Removing ourselves from the more detached way of working with screens and iPads. So this embodied act of drawing, we think, is very valuable. I don't know how to play the film. I'll pass it, it's okay. So what you see here is a sample even on the first evening, the first day, the first group completed this panel, the second completed this panel. I think this one almost worked as a kind of an archaeological site. The students were kind of excavating it, taking off masking tapes, and had a kind of the logic of a plan, I think. This was very much, the second group was looking at the second style of Roman wall painting. And this, it's still with masking tapes, but probably this is closer to the third style. This group was interested in the actual function of the chalk and the blackboard, the fact that you erase it and you do it again and again. And these iterations are part of the magic of the medium. And I think this board expresses very well the tools we're using. And we also were bringing these boards in the city. And we had various discussions with a group about the practicalities of that and the meaning of that. But we thought that this, as an event in the city, you know, provoking curiosity, we thought that it would be a very interesting experience, and that the actual drawing, rather than taking photographs, or rather than using your phone or looking at things quickly, the act of drawing and spending a lot of time in the building and trying to understand it without the use of the phone, and through working all together, we think this is very, very important. So the students here were drawing Borromini's wonderful church in plan, and there were almost, you know, 12 attempts or 11 attempts or versions to find the plan. So we had smaller test drawings on the side, and we had layers of a central drawing to try to figure out the exact ellipse. And they were using ropes to carry the boards in the city, and they used then the rope and as a measuring and marking. So it was a very minimal. They only had standard chalk, white chalk, and the ropes. And that's how they figured out the geometry. They've been an amazing group, as you can see. Yeah. And of course, it was really nice in the church because we were given the time, but at some point the security guard realized what we were doing. They brought in their official. They thought we have to finish in 15 minutes. So that's what we did. I don't know how to I don't know how to play this film, and that's a nicer one to play. Is it like that?
No.
Such a shame. It's a small thing. I think it might be nicer to just people to understand the scale.
It's forward.
You're moving
Back.
forward. Or
Okay.
you back to that. No.
Could we?
Okay. That seems to be not the video because it usually appear at the back.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
I hope that won't happen with the rest.
It's a lovely film of the boards being closed up. I'm sorry we can't play. I think we can't play.
Yeah, it's just a slow.
Okay.
So I'm going to just do what Yeoryia and I will do. Do you want to stay up with me, Yeoryia? We'll do one last project together. So this is one that was which we did. The whole project lasted over an extended period of time, and it was eventually shown at the Venice Biennale. But it brings together many of the themes which we've spoken about tonight. In the year 1999, I was asked to design a building for people with dementia in Dublin, and given a beautiful invitation, which is they said, we know nothing about architecture and you know nothing about dementia, so we'll teach each other. And I spent the next 10 years learning about how dementia occurs. And what I was most curious about was not just an empathetic interaction with people with dementia, but to get a better understanding of how we experience space at all. What is space? How do we experience it? Is there a part of the mind that is dedicated to the experience of space? And what happens when we begin to lose that? We begin to lose that faculty to position ourselves in space. And we found an extraordinary thing, which is that there's a place called the hippocampus, which in a sense takes all of the messages which come from the eyes, the ears, and which have already been processed into data and brings it all together and creates a scene. And it lays it down as short-term memory. And this is where the neuroscientists tell us that our concept of space and time is synthesized for the first time within the brain. And what happens is that the particular pathology of dementia erodes that first of all, and the way in which those scenes are laid down in short-term memory. So this plan of the building has got to do with the fact that people with dementia wander. That's a seeking behavior. And the idea that you can't connect the past to the future. You're in this continuous present tense. And as you walk around the building, we wanted you to be able to walk around a sequence of rooms that look onto gardens, which have got different plants and different smells at different times of the year. But wherever you go, centrifugally, there's a centripetal force in the plan that always brings you back into the social center again. That's the basic organization of the building. And so it's like this kind of spatial daisy chain that connects all these things together and allows you to move with confidence through spaces and to help you to reconstruct that connection between past and present. These are just simple images of the rooms, and we made this drawing back in 2006, which is based on Mughal drawings, which is looking at the place as a kind of, it was a wall garden that we had built it in as a kind of paradise garden that in a sense, if that's your whole world, that it's a changeable and movable world that you can experience by moving through the spaces. And I began to develop a little conception myself. I'm going to use Paul Clay, if you don't mind, to take you quickly through a little parable I have about space, which is that a child doesn't know it's not its mother's body. And at some moment, a space of negotiation has to open up between the mother and child. And that space is not innocent dimension. It's not white, luminous space. It's a space of desires and taboos and permissions. And that's the first space that we experience. And as a child starts to move around the room and grip the furniture and become mobile and to feel their way, their sense of space develops into something more comprehensive. But the important thing is it is not innocent either. The house and its rules and permissions and so on are part of the acquisition of that sense of space. And as we move out into the world and begin to negotiate the city, that sense of space becomes more and more complex. But it is not an empty medium. It's a space that's absolutely full of what we are. In the sense it's a correlative to our own identity, our own personality. What else could it be? And as we move through life, our sense of being able to move through space is highly coded by the way in which we've learned to be in space in the first place. And when you get to my point in life, things begin to change. I'm not as mobile as I used to be. And when I step down off that stage, I'm wondering about my knee. My peripheral vision is starting to go. I'm beginning to lose my sense of being able to see, perceive, and act in space. So no space is the same for any person. It's something that we negotiate on our own terms from our own history, our own limitations, and our own desires. What begins to happen with people with dementia is they lose that sense of space, and with it becomes a destruction of the whole personality. And it is the most terrible thing to experience and the most terrible thing to witness. And we spent 10 years in our office saying, if you want to work on this building, you have to sit and talk to people with dementia. So 10 years later, after the building was finished, we were asked to do something for the Biennale, and I said to Yeoryia, would she collaborate and help us to work on and to make a manifestation of the building we had made and the things that we had learned. And this is what we started to do together. We worked with Objectif, who are graphic designers, who made this beautiful website, which is dementia friendly in terms of all of its iconography. And in it, we have these amazing interviews. I'm going to just play you a little bit of one of them. This is a woman who has dementia telling us about her state. It's gone. I'm sorry. We're running a bit short of time. The sound has gone, so I'm just going to move forward. I'm sorry. I wanted you to hear that. We interviewed these amazing people from UCL. John O'Keefe won the Nobel Prize for his work on these extraordinary things called place cells, which tell you where you are in space. And they fire when you move into spaces, and they give yourself a location in space. There are boundary vector cells, there are place cells. They all have a dedicated purpose, which is to situate you in space and time. If any of you came back to this building in 25 years' time and it had been turned into a health resort and spa, when you come into the pool room, the place cell that's in the place that you're sitting at the moment would fire again. It's absolutely independent of the kind of experience that you're seeing visually, and it's location dependent. And these are amazing experiments which they did at UCL, where they experimented with place cells and rats and so on, so they could understand the way that these are firing. And this wonderful artist called Paul Verhoeven, who through his whole diagnosis of dementia afterwards painted every day to describe the world that he was experiencing. We have to see these not as diagnostic paintings, but as individual pieces of art in their own right, which show his description of his own ontological condition as he moves through the stages of dementia. And bit by bit by bit, the drawings become so incoherent or so unable to describe himself as an individual that you can't really see the individual in them anymore. This is the first sketch we did in the Arsenale, which is looking at the room we were in and the way we might make an open landscape with a description of the building and the way that people use it. Yeoryia, do you want to talk about that?
And we started doing experiments of drawing individual drawings of not how the building was built or not how the building was designed by the architect, by Níall and his team. But what we were trying to understand is how the building might be inhabited and how the building is inhabited and how the building is understood very differently by the different individuals who occupy. And in order to do this, we realized that the drawing should happen not from one person, but from a group of people. So we were about, we were 16 people drawing because we wanted to embody in the process of drawing at least 16 perspectives and contradictory perspectives often of how the building might have been felt and might have been experienced. And so here is, I'm doing a test on a milky surface of glass, and there's a camera below recording the process of drawing, because this is the second thing we quickly decided, that our drawing should not be fixed. Human experience is not fixed. It's all experience as a flow of moments. So the drawing had to be collective and the drawing had to be time-based. And this is another score we made. This is this drawing describes which bits of the plan each participant would draw. So each participant is each drafter who produces the drawings is a color, and they move and they shift from one part of the plan to another. So in the social spaces of the building, which are the spaces that have multiple colors, you would have many people drawing at the same time. In another corner here, which is only the corner of the garden, you might have only one person's mind contemplating the garden. So wherever you see a density of drawing, it's usually more social spaces. And we made a special room. We used a special room to gather and to put all our research on the wall. And we made these special desks with a glass top, and then a location for the camera to be recording our drawing process from below. And here is one of our collaborators, Ms. Kosumi, who is drawing a bedroom. She's drawing it based on her own experience, and she's bringing also very personal documentation related to her own family. It was in many ways a quite moving and deeply personal projects at times. And we were interested in this assemblage of multiple hands and multiple minds drawing simultaneously. And here you see how we might be in the same area of the plan, but we may have 2 or 3 or 4 people drawing, especially if that area was a social area. And gradually, we started accumulating hundreds and hundreds of drawings. Each drawing, I think, had a maximum of, 30 minutes duration of the film, because that was the limit by the camera. But we had enormous length of footage and hundreds of drawings. And all of these had to be curated and organized in order to tell the story of the building from the perspective of the inhabitants. And here we're drawing, I think, the breakfast room here, and it is as if we are having breakfast. It is as if we are in the room. The room is all drawn, you know, to scale, but what we're doing there is we are enacting the experience of the room. more of these drawings. We had this thing about the wandering line, a continuous line. So the pen would never lift from the paper. And it was continuous because consciousness is continuous. It's not simply that the person would walk to a place, but it could be their wandering mind, but it could be a continuity of consciousness. And then we would do, I think we have a little bit problem because we cannot play the films, but we would enact dancing events because they were similar to what would happen in the piano room of the building. And performing the dance would help us draw the plan of the piano room in a more intuitive way. And all these drawings, some of the kitchen, some of the various rooms and areas of the building, some of the gardens were all layered and collected. And we had then the task how we would curate them, and how we would organize them in plan, but also in time. We ended up with a 16-minute film that was played in a loop, and the 16 minutes of this drawing would cover the whole experience of the building from morning for 24 hours, from morning to the next morning. On the top of this large surface drawing, here you see now the photographs that we took after the installation was complete in the Venice Biennale. What we had layers, 3 sonic layers. You see the black and the white balls are speakers, because we were interested in local sounds, sounds of the drawing itself, building sounds of the building, doors and steps, and then more regional, global sounds related to Ireland and its landscape. It was a very immersive experience that we were trying to achieve. These sounds were all creating a quite immersive environment. And the drawing on the floor was constantly changing. And our script determined a sequence that would go from morning to afternoon to evening, and then back to morning. So here I think you see midday. You see the hands drawing. I'm showing static images, but you would need to imagine that all of these drawings were animated. They were all active drawings. And then
Recognize this is the Angelus Yeoryia.
this is the
6
Angelus.
PM on
This
the-
is 6
You
p.m.
see the whole plan only once in the whole day, which is when you have the end.
This is the moment. So this is the moment when you have you see the whole plan.
In Ireland, they play the Angelus on the radio. You hear the bells, everything stops, and you hear the bells on the radio. So it's a national event every day.
And what we were trying, we had amazing conversations with different scientists, neuroscientists, biologists, anthropologists, also policymakers, patients and their teams. And we were trying to gather all the knowledge from these interdisciplinary teams and somehow embody it in the drawing. So the cells that Neil talked about, the hexagonal place cells that exist in our brain, were represented with this net, this colorful fluorescent net that goes over the building. So every time you would go into a room, your place cells are activated. I think it's a little bit difficult to describe without the films. And this is an image from above, as you see the performance, the drawing performance at one particular time. You see the image, the building construction, its physical reality, its walls are the ghost image of the drawing. So the drawing is full of color and full of information to capture a kind of it's like a vessel of life, And the building itself, the detail of how the building is constructed, it becomes a kind of a ghost image. And here you see various versions of this.
This is deep night.
Deep night. So morning was also spring. Midday was summer. Afternoon was autumn, and winter was and nighttime was also winter. So we were relating an annual cycle and a day cycle in this piece. I don't think we can play that film, but it doesn't matter.
We'll see how we do it. It's only a half a minute.
Oh.
This is the collaboration.
Very Neil. He's fantastic with photographs. He's okay.
I think we can.
We can.
But this is done by the AV people.
Thank you. I think that's the end, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What's best for your plan? Up to you. We can break history.
Okay. So thank you both so much. I knew that was going to be amazing, and it was. We can perhaps just briefly for 10 minutes stay down here if people have intense questions that they're burning to ask, and then you're all warmly invited upstairs to the foyer for a drink and continuing the conversation up there more informally. But if anybody wanted to ask a question down here, you are very well.
Do you mean in the collaboration? Yeah. In the collaborations?
I think when you get groups of people, you very quickly find that there are people who have different kinds of voices. Groups are actually quite good at tolerating and even making the most of those voices. And I think there's people who feel authorship usually treat contrary voices as obstacles. But if you can lift the bind of authorship from your own thinking, you look at the other voice as a protagonist and a broader field, and you see it as being, one of the agents in the system that you have with you. And it's not to be resisted, but to be engaged with dialogue, or to be allowed. Because the most interesting thing you're going to find is from someone who doesn't read. So I think we've never, I don't remember any moment where we thought, well, we can't begin with that. It hasn't been part of the way in which we did.
I think it's fascinating because there is a design that relates to the structure of the collaboration. In a way, the collaboration is quite precisely designed. And then it's voiced without collaboration. Because there is a structure. And because we're going to use all, let's say, 12 drawings produced by 12 participants, I think there is less hierarchy because the system has built in allowance for all the voices, or the time has been designed in such a way. Of course, there will be influences by different people at different stages. But I think it's actually fascinating to see a degree of otherness coming into the work. something that we have not imagined, and then the collaborators could not imagine. My personal interest in chance, I was looking up at solo authorship a lot, you know, I don't know, John Cage, Duchamp, you know, in art. And actually the most interesting aspect of losing your own control and going up outside your own design parameters is through the others, rather than your own accidents and your own, it's through the others. And maybe building practice is quite collective and collaborative, isn't it? And the making of buildings involves many people. So I don't know, I think that sometimes it's hidden. Collaboration is hidden, although it's there.
Well, I think also I would say that Yeoryia and I have been disagreeing pretty vehemently for about 25 years. It's the basis of our relationship. And today we had a long argument about, you know, about something. And actually what we were discussing today was the extent to which we are actually exercising authorship when we say that we're not. And is that understood, the extent to which this is curated and stored, and that there's a degree of discrimination that is coming from the position of the two of us, and how do you place that within what appears or could be said to be an open collaborative system, but in fact, you know, John Cage is very good at saying it is both scored and open to opportunities, but you have to see it as a both and situation, not you know, not as one down the other.
Yeah, I would actually follow on that. The idea that our conditions, the structure is and when I was looking for their, well, how beautiful well, I do very similar things, but with art, the results are very different. And I was kind of wondering how much that which you have actually, you know, potential students were using that word. There was a kind of almost a kind of delicacy and precision that was in the thing. When you would probably really love sense, you get not gesture that would happen probably a lot of fields. So it was interesting hearing, if I understand exactly, I'm still of enormous and conjunctions curated to create stuff. So just kind of, it was not an observation, but question.
So one of the things, we had a conversation over lunch with, or just before lunch with the students yesterday or the day before, where the challenge put down about the extent to which we were eventually so discriminating with what passed or what didn't. And rather than polarizing it and saying that we are or not, what you've got to do is to look at the project we're doing here and saying you have a number of frames of reference. Because, I mean, the idea that anybody can invent out of the innocence of their own mind is not something that I believe in. We are mimetic creatures. We are highly conditioned by the society that we're in. And we're always operating a set of repertoire that means that we think. However original we think we're being, you have to understand that it's not quite as simple as that. And so the explicit frames of reference in the project we're doing outside are the frescoes which we presented as being subjects of study for this course, or for this summer school, which are offered as a whole. They have a whole cultural hinterland which you have to engage with when you're doing the project, and what the students are doing is dialogue with that. The second thing is that it's being taught by the two of us, and we have a 20-year history of teaching together, and we don't leave it at the door. It's something that you have to engage with and be in dialogue with your friend. There's also a new dynamic that comes from that particular group who met in the courtyard on Monday and have never seen each other before, but come from architects' offices, live in British education, and so on, so on. So everything is going to blow the condition and the principle of scoring. So rather than thinking of it as being, is it about constraint versus freedom? Is it about authorship versus collective? I think you have to see the way that human society operates as being more complex in that sense. And the way in which we, either individually or collectively, create within human society as being much more enmeshed in existing cultural situations. And what you're trying to do is to find some kind of harmony over the whole course of the week. That there's something that there's a ground we can find, which none of us could have found if we had done it by ourselves, but which by finding it together opens up a new landscape that is a creative landscape for all of us.
To add something, in design practice and in art practice, often, I mean, there are differences in projects, but often something has been pre-designed and pre-decided, and there is the materialization of that thing that has been pre-designed. I think what is interesting is when somebody and our participants and our students are welcome to do this in their own projects, and some of them do it. What happens when you design very precisely the environment, you design very precisely the tools, you design very precisely the materials, the context, and then how can that environment influences everyone, influences the directors of the project and the actual participants. So I think everybody is influenced. There's not a one static view from the beginning that the project will be like this, because we will all experience a week together, and that shared environment and the input from everybody will keep changing our view about what the project is somehow. Of course, there will be a lot of control. Of course, there will be a lot of influence. But I'm very interested in that the influence of the ensemble to our participants, but also to us. That it gives us back a lot of not known material from the beginning.
But the last thing I would say about that also is that there's always a presupposition, there's a habitual presupposition, which is that the work is the thing that the group made. And the first thing that we showed was the orchid projects in drawing and building, which is flipping around that on the back, which is saying that not that the group made the work, but that the work makes the group. And the work is conceptually unfinished. So it is the activity of making the work that is the primary purpose of the thing, rather than everybody getting together to achieve a destination together. It's a completely different way of thinking things.
Or conceptually because then we have to elaborate with the wrong just good. You go ahead. Just about to leave it for the yeah. This violence.
I think some of the projects are extremely designed and predetermined. The blackboards and what we did in Venice. But Orkney was walking on the moon, joining Lady. The constraint was the island and the timeline. So I think they have different degrees of openness. Some projects are defined by the size of the paper, the activity, and the time, nothing else. But others have a lot.
But we didn't wake up this morning and say we were going to make a drawing of St. Carlo. It just happened that we had a long conversation before we left as to whether we should take the boards into the city or not. And there was a discussion about the fact the boards would be made a bit large so only the boys could carry them with their armband. Was that fair and so on? And then the pieces of rope were brought, and we had no idea, you know, if you try and set it on ellipse, you get 2 fixed points, you get a rope, and that's how you do it. We did not know. I don't think we did not know before we left that we were going to do that. It just happened that those were the things we had to have.
Good, beautiful project. I have a lot of questions from students as well about the embodied experience of going out and being on the floor, but maybe we should continue the discussion over the upstairs and say thank you so much to Neil and Yeoryia.